Yesterday, Tenacious Trilobyte's video of him shooting his Lee Navy came on my feed. It got me to Googling, and I found this: the Standard Organization Book for 2,100-ton destroyers, Atlantic Fleet, 1943. It has some pretty interesting stuff, including a novelty, Navy Rifle Squads. The Marines get the best PR, and they're undoubtedly the more specialized amphibious force.
Yes, sir.
But until the 1970s, using the crew of a ship as infantrymen was a valued skill set in the US Navy. The so-called Blue Jackets had conducted large-scale amphibious assaults at brigade strength in the early 20th century, and landing party manuals from after World War II still had provision for sailor battalions pulled from various ships in formation. Their mission sets by the end were generally limited due to the lack of organic firepower, poor sustainment, and their ad hoc nature. But in the interest of time, I've linked some sources in the description for your reading. The example from World War II applies to Fletcher-class destroyers. Its landing force was essentially a very small platoon, led by the ship's first lieutenant. He was also the ship's damage control officer and head of the 1st Division. The force had 2 rifle squads, one formed with men from the 1st and 2nd Divisions, which were the deck and hull divisions, and the other from the engineering division. Number 1 squad consisted of a squad leader, a second in command, 3 scouts, 2 automatic riflemen, and 3 riflemen. The squad leader was a petty officer, an NCO in this case with the rate of bosun's mate 2nd class. His 2IC was a non-rated seaman 1st class, and the remainder were any grade of seaman. Most in the squad were armed with rifles, most likely M1903 Springfields. The automatic riflemen, meanwhile, were armed with Thompson submachine guns. Note that these landing parties were different from the CB construction battalions and naval beach battalions, which were intended to be landed as a rule and had M1 Garens and carbines in their TO&E. The 2nd squad was identical, but led by a gunner's mate 1st class from the Ordnance Division and composed of firemen from the Engineering Division. The Fletcher class itself had 2 lifeboats that could be used for landing forces. Each would have an additional Chief Petty Officer or Petty Officer 1st class acting as boat officer. Fast forward to 1950-1960, and naval landing parties looked much more like their Marine cousins. Squads were led by carbine-armed Petty Officers 3rd class and consisted of 3 fire teams of 4 men each. Each team was led by a Seaman 1st class, the highest of the non-rates, while the rest were Seaman 1st or 2nd class. Like a Marine squad, most were armed with M1 Garens, while an automatic rifleman manned an M1918A2 BAR. At this time, destroyers, destroyer leaders, and destroyer escorts were intended to provide up to 1 rifle squad, amphibious assault ships a rifle platoon, and battleships, carriers, and cruisers a rifle company. Division flagships were intended to provide an additional battalion headquarters company to lead their division's companies, which by itself could provide a full battalion. And destroyer squadrons would provide 2 platoon and 1 company headquarters. With 8 ships in a squadron of the time, that force could notionally land a company. As stated before, a Petty Officer 3rd class would lead squads. Lieutenants junior grade or ensigns would lead platoons. Lieutenants commanded companies, while a company Chief Petty Officer acted as a 1st sergeant. Battalions were led by commanders, and regiments by captains, although the manual stated regiments were envisioned only for parade purposes. The heaviest weapon in a battalion was the M1919A4 30 caliber machine gun, housed in a company machine gun platoon. Completely lacking in artillery, mortars, and tanks, fire support was limited to naval gunfire support and aviation. This video was a little more casual since I'm actually working on a longer video on US Army drones and wanted to keep it brief. If you want to learn more about some of the Navy ranks and rates mentioned, check out this video on that topic. We'll see you over there.